Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Wilhelms. I'm the Executive Director of Anderson Ranch. And before we get started, I'd like to remind you that our annual art auction is on Saturday here at the ranch. So it's our art auction and community picnic, and it's a ton of fun. And our silent auction opens at 11 o'clock, and our live auction will be right here in Shermer Meeting Hall at noon. And then we'll follow that with a picnic and lots of other good fun things. So please join us. And on your way out today, you can preview all the auction works. They're on display in the big barn at the top of the hill. Those are the live auction works. And then our silent auction works are in the painting building. And it's a really fantastic group of works, so don't miss it. Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to call up Ann Cook. And Ann is going to introduce our speakers. A little bit about Ann. She serves as the secretary to our board of trustees, and she is a passionate leader in the arts. She also serves as the live auction co-chair for our recognition dinner, and as such, she brings in amazing works that we sell in our live auction, and that money goes to sustain and support Anderson Ranch. So she does tremendous work for us. She's a very important member of our Art and Artist Advisory Group that pulls together our outstanding lineup of summer speakers, including Vik and Renaud today. Please welcome Ann Cook. Thank you.
I think I might need to lower this. Thank you so much, Nancy, for that amazing introduction. It's my pleasure today to welcome this session featuring Vik Muniz in conversation with Renaud Proch. It's a delight to welcome Vik back to Anderson Ranch. He was last here in 2005 when he received our National Artist Award. It's especially a pleasure to have him here today in this conversation moderated by Renaud. As Vik and I both serve on the Independent Curators International Board of Trustees, where Renaud has been the executive director since 2013. Oh, you are there. Oh, good. As a director of ICI, Renaud has really put the international into Independent Curators International. Under his guidance, ICI has convened curatorial training sessions, which we call the Curatorial Intensive, in locations as diverse as Bangkok, Bogota, and Addis Ababa. Along with circulating award-winning exhibitions, he has initiated programs bringing important international curators to speak throughout the United States. For the last 3 years, Renaud has forged a relationship between ICI and institutions in New Orleans and Chicago, bringing ICI's expertise in training curators and mounting exhibitions to important and diverse civic centers in the U.S. He has a unique perspective on the international art scene and an intimate knowledge of current trends right here at home. Before turning over the microphone to Renaud and Vik, I'd like to thank our corporate sponsors, Douglas Elliman Real Estate, our premier sponsor for the summer, and Christie's, Cultured Magazine, and the Westin Snowmass Resort. I'd also like to thank the presenting sponsor for the summer series, Toby Devin Lewis, as well as our National Council sponsors and all of you who support the important mission of Anderson Ranch. Renaud, it's all yours. Let the conversation begin.
Thank you so much, Anne, for this wonderful and warm introduction. And since the mic is mine for a minute, Vik, I'm just going to take advantage of it and really thank everybody at Anderson Ranch for such a wonderful welcome and for making us feel so at home. It's my first time at Anderson Ranch. It's your second time, Vik, but I feel that the last 2 days has been spent with a sort of extended family, and it seems like you're all here in our living room. So I want to thank everyone, all the staff at Anderson Ranch, Anne, Madam Secretary, and also John and Sharon Hoffman for their hospitality. Thank you so much. So thanks are great because they sort of make us feel, more familiar and part of a family and a group of friends around a common topic. And today, Vik, the common topic is you. So your work needs very little introduction. I think that all of us
you can
here.
Introduce it.
I will. I like to state rules and then break them. So it is, however, work that for the last 30 years has made so many of us think, provoked thoughts and different ways of using our visual cognitive senses, and to look at visual culture and art history in different ways, decoding the images that construct our culture. And you have a very particular way of working. You are based in Rio as well as in Brooklyn, New York, and we were talking over brunch earlier today about how you're able to work from two different studios and really to work while you're on the road like this. I think being in Aspen, I was reminded yesterday with you about nature here, and we kind of got lost as we were going back to your place, and we looked at the valley, and there was this kind of beautiful rolling valley of aspen trees. And you explained to me that at first I thought they were birches. Excuse my ignorance. And you explained to me that they were in fact aspen trees, and that they were the largest organism, or one of the largest organisms.
Yeah.
And it's one single organism that sprouts into all of these trees. And it reminded me that in some ways that's a metaphor for your practice.
Wow.
Yeah, why not? There, I went there.
I said you could interest me. You exaggerated. It's fine. Wow. I'm flattered.
No, I think that we see a lot of your, of your work, of your photography, of your sculpture, of your method of constructing images, and we'll see many of them today. They're very, they seem very different. There's different bodies of work, but they're always concerned with a similar view of visual culture and a view of the world. So at the core of it, I think, are concerns of perception, of transformation, of illusion. I think a connection between art and magic. Part of you is a bit of a trickster. I think that there's a lot of humor in your work, and we'll certainly see a lot of it in some of those images. If we start with this image that's on the board right now, Vik, this could be a Alighiero and Boetti work,
Yeah.
Map of the World, or this could be a Vik Muniz work. I don't know. Maybe you can tell us which one it is.
I had a conversation. This is a really interesting place. If you come to New York, it's called Magazzino. If you go to the Art Foundation, it's about 16 kilometers from it. It's a brand new spot that this Italian man, there's a couple, she's American, he's Italian, they put together, they only show Italian art. And he had purchased this work from me, and he owns the original from Alighiero Boetti, and I was asked to talk about this relationship, And it is interesting because Alighiero Boetti was one of my favorite artists, has always been. And when people say, "Oh, you're Brazilian artist," I think it's interesting because I started thinking about becoming a contemporary artist, based on art that I had seen on my formative years, and basically 60s and 70s. And some people fail to see a connection. I clearly see that my art is informed by minimalism, by arte povera. I had a conversation with Jacques-Louis about it, because he said, it's very hard for people to put my work into the same context, too, because I do something quite different. In a way, I feel very close to him, too. Because after a long time, I realized that what connects me to that kind of practice is that most of what I do has to do with creating a connection between a mental, making people pay attention to the interface between mind and matter, between consciousness and phenomenon. I think it took me almost 30 years to formulate something very, a description of art that's so synthetic, But whenever somebody asks me, what is art? My answer is, art is the interface, the evolution of the interface between mind and matter, between consciousness and phenomenon. It's between creating formulas and devices that make us understand the world that it's outside, or the material world, which is, it manifests to us through our senses. Now, we're very creative, we've created many ways to deal with this word. One of it is its language. We take a lot of this for granted because, the way we live our lives. And I think art has almost the responsibility of bringing you back to that point. There's something, I always give this example, I'm a professional. I go to museums to see, sometimes I go to see one painting. I'm not a tourist. I don't wander around, unless if it's a group show or a curated exhibition, which is a context. But I go a lot to museums to look at people looking at art. And it's fascinating, how people, why they go always from the right to the left. Because if they go to the other way, they see a completely different exhibition. It's a serial, they accumulate. It's very interesting how the display affects the perception of it. But it's the most fascinating thing is that everybody that goes to a museum, they go towards a piece. And museums are a place where you ritualize visual experience. I have to stand to do this, sorry. They go to a place as if there's a mark on the floor. They go there, they stop at the same spot. Because that is the spot where the painting feels the visual fields about 110 degrees. And they can go a little bit like this, and they are inside, say, that landscape, that world that was invented by an artist. And if they do this, they're back in the museum safely, But more than that, people do this. Why do they do that? It's very interesting. It took me a long time to realize that they do this. Because from that first perception, they see something that is a work of the imagination, something mental, something that was created by an artist, an invention. It was something from the intellect, from inside somebody's mind. And when they do this, they see material. They see the things that will enable the artist to bring that vision to the world. They see something from outside. Mostly it's made out of mundane substances like earth, oil, animal substances, But with the great craft and skill, the artist could make that into something that connected to the mind. It's interesting that art is not in the material. That's why people go back and forth. They go, because it's not in the mind, but in the exact moment where one thing turns into another, where you feel that material becomes something of a thought, of an idea. And people go back and forth because they want to experience the crossing of that imaginary threshold that separates our inner world and the world outside of us. That's the sublime in art. It's just like, for me, it's like almost when the ball has left the hand of the basketballer and hasn't reached the rim yet. It's a suspension. It's like, it's a beautiful moment, That moment when something from outside becomes from the inside, you feel that this, there is like, I keep thinking, historically speaking, we go from the Paleolithic period, you had this very thick wall of ignorance that separated our inner world from the outside world. We didn't know anything. And through technology, we've polished this wall, through millennia, until we got to something very thin, very effective, a very incredible device, which is photography. I still think, and I may be old-fashioned, that the photograph as an object, photographs that you hold, they're becoming very scarce nowadays, because I'm buying all of them from eBay. The photograph is still the most effective tool to interface between mind and matter, because it retains properties from the mind, because it appears as an idea, it brings you a memories, it's almost like a thought. But it also has properties of the material world. It's something that you can hold. It's something that you can keep. It's very important that it's something that exists outside of you. Now, we managed to get all the images in the world in this thing here, which is also very thin, I must say. But it's different. It's sheer immateriality. It makes you deal with this idea of the world that we've been formulating in a very different way. And I think we're utterly unprepared to deal with the world with such lightness. We're still like in a very transitional place where we're still dealing with the idea of inside and outside. I think art, it's a long answer for your question, I'm sorry.
No, it's...
art is still has, in a way, has the responsibility to foster that relationship, or at least create discernment and promote the meditation in the fact that we have an inner life, that is composed. It's like it's made of tiny millions of little fragments and parts of how things that we see and catch, and it's different. It's very unique, what enables us to compare these inner constructions that we make, to other people's, is what makes us what we can call, humanity. Is the fact that we were able to create these tools, and then I hate when people think of artists as some guy who smokes a lot, drinks a lot of beer, stays in a dirty studio the whole day, makes some stuff, and is not respected by his parents.
Which is true.
No, yeah. And I hate to think of that, because if there is a long time ago, 70,000 years ago, now a guy walks inside a cave, and he sees inside the cave something that looks like something he's seen before. It had to be something that he's seen before, because otherwise he wouldn't see it. It would be just a crack on the wall. He sees on the cracks on the wall of the cave a form that he recognizes, recognition, thinking twice, right? And then it was not just a form, it was a form of an animal. Not just an animal, it was a bison. Not any bison. It was the bison that he had hunted the winter before when everybody was very hungry. And in looking at those cracks in the wall, he remembered the rush towards the animal, the spears, the blood being gushed out, the big fire they made, the party that issued, the dance, everything that was so happy. And then he looks at it, just cracks on the wall. And then he picked up some blunt thing on the floor, went and he completed that picture. Maybe made a tusk or a tail or a missing leg. And that guy is the first artist. Not happy with that. He just calls his tribesmen friends and went like, look at that, what do you see? And he was very surprised that they all saw the same thing, Not only he could make a picture, bring into a cave something that happened in another time or something that was not there, he could also share that with other people. With that invention, which was probably, I think the invention of representation is probably the most important achievement of humanity after the control of fire. We could actually make our lives extend beyond our lifetime. We could actually relay experiences beyond our own lives. We could actually communicate things that happened. We could retain memories even when we tend to forget them. We create the idea of history, and we create the idea of belief. I was discussing this, that I remember I was once in a conference, for a neuroscience conference in San Diego, huge conference, and with Antonio Damasio, and he argued that humans are the only creative creatures in the planet, right? And I had to, he invited me. Very respectfully, I had to disagree with him, because I think everything that's creative, everything that's alive is creative. There's a type of creativity that is about adapting and solving problems, And I said that, everything is creative by solving problems. We're creative in a specific way. Mankind is the only species that actually makes problems. You see an orangutan, search for termites with a stick, but he doesn't invent a Sudoku or anything like that. So if you if you think about, why do we invent problems to solve? That we create models. Model making is a peculiarity of our species. We create models of things that can happen, that did happen, that could never happen, but still they are there. We invented fiction, And with fiction, we create situations that weren't lived. So this is belief, The problem with my definition of art, which is the interface between mind and matter, is that it applies to science and it applies to religion. And we must not forget that these things are the same thing once,
But I want to go, in more depth towards a little later in the conversation about this relationship between matter and spirituality. But I think it's important to maybe just mark at this stage of the conversation the relationship, that you find in arte povera of the transformation, because this is very much what arte povera artists, are known for, is this transformation of the matter into the idea, into the poetic, into the art,
poetry,
and poetry. But you, in just this answer, you have basically spanned the entirety of art history and human representation of the world, which is not only quite a feat, but I think helps us understand, the concerns of your work. And I think if we look at some images now, we'll see we'll see the kinds of art history that you quote consistently through your work. And I want to ask you a little bit about this act of quoting art history. Maybe we can look at some images.
It's funny. I've been a curator as long as I've been an artist. And when you say quoting, it has a lot to do with that. Curating is something that I really enjoy doing it, because you can pick things that you've seen from the vocabulary of art making that is around, and you can use it to make a context that is very specific. And you can talk about even the way people see things. One of my favorite art pieces that I've ever done was a curatorial piece. It was called Rebus. I did it for MoMA. And then I did it, I picked one piece from the collection, which was a Sigmund Polka drawing, And then I said, what could come after this? And then I did it were 108 pieces that they were connected by some reason. There was always a different reason. So the show was not about the pieces, but the space between the pieces. So you always try to figure out. So they were really silly things. So I had like a rock from Giovanni Anselmo, and then I had like scissors from the design department, and then a ball of paper by another British artist. Martin Creed, rock, paper, scissors, And then there'll be things that were connected by color, by sound. There'll be like a picture of Weston, of Tina Modotti reciting a poem, but the picture of somebody reciting a poem has no sound. It's just like, And then next to it will be Picasso's guitar. And next to it would be Dieter Rams' brown record player. And the fact that I could get from, some of them are quite beautiful, because you would have a Duchamp shovel next to a Rubbermaid bucket from the design department. And then it makes you really think, But there's when you say quoting, there's always a feeling that in the 80s, people took a lot of freedom with appropriation art, and then they were thinking about, commenting on other people's art. I don't think I do that. I take it for what it represents at that moment to me. I'm not talking about the artists themselves, but I'm always thinking about what that piece is doing at the precise moment I'm looking at it.
Well, that's what's so interesting to me, is that it's not necessarily about quoting history or the artist's intention, but it's almost quoting the visual importance, the kind of the cultural icon, the icon nature of the image that you're quoting. Let's have a look at some images.
Okay.
And we can.
When I started working, because of this thing about the material, I had to work with sculpture first. Because I made a way from material to images. So my first works I worked with advertising early on, and I kept thinking, what if the person who actually creates the campaign was actually the person who makes the product, Because advertising is about giving personality, feelings to powders, liquids, gels, So I made a show called Relics. It was like a museum show of things that had serious identity crisis. This is the clown skull, a remnant of a race of entertainers from South America a long time ago. The Ashanti joystick. And it was so old, it was made for Atari. This is the whole Encyclopedia Britannica book binded in a single volume. So you see, it's a tension between what you see and what that represents, the meaning of that thing. This is the Tupperware sarcophage for a very long afterlife. This is like a nail fetish. Wait a second. Oh, there's a good one. I have one of a half tombstone for people who are not dead yet, but it's not here. I always worked with icons, archetypes. You see, my parents came, the first time they set foot in a museum was to see a show of mine. They never been to a museum. For them, it's very, they would feel very afraid to go in. And I am very mindful of that, So not that I want to make art excessive. I want to make art. I call it the Simpsons model. If you watch The Simpsons, there are some jokes there that you need to be, graduate with honors from Oxford to be able to understand what they're talking about. And at the same time, a 5-year-old is laughing of something that's happening at the same time. I think the architecture of art, may allow for you to first. The basis of it is a gut response. It's something perceptual, something physical. It's always a gimmick. Gimmicks are it was almost a bad word in the art world for a long time. But I think gimmicks are very important because in the profusion of images that we have today, to be able to make an image that you look at it and say, wait a minute, and start going, it's very hard. So you need to have a hook, a catch, And then once you have that, which is physical, you can layer all kinds of historical, erudite information that you want, and you can actually communicate with people who could understand the tip of it, But I think the fact but to be able to, when you make art in the studio, that's not art. You're just making something, making a test. Art happens when it's hung on the wall, and there's somebody in front of it. It's just like that tree thing, It has to be there, and somebody has to be in front of it. That moment that I was saying of this
that
thing,
gesture.
yes. That is when it happens, And you only do half of it as an artist. The other half, the spectator, the public do. Artists say, I only do work for myself. I think they're lying when they say that because there's an artist I really respect. She's dead now. I shouldn't say bad things about her. I'm gonna do it anyway. She's dead. I was in a lecture from her. She gave very few lectures. I really liked her work. And then she said, I only do art for myself. And I was like, so why do you make editions? And she got so pissed at me. She never spoke to me again, But it's true, you make art so you can connect, And
But the same question about edition, because I think you move from sculpture to photography. And photography is a medium that, that has a incredible power in dissemination, of course. So how is that part of your interest in popularizing the language of art?
I don't think I don't really want to popularize or make it more accessible. I want to make art independent of a target public. I want to make art for my mother. When I think about it, it's just if you're conscious of the cultural baggage. Como diz that?
Baggage.
I came from France now. I'm speaking French. Cultural baggage that the viewer comes to that encounter, right? If you're mildly conscious of that, you can make that encounter more intense, more profound. And it doesn't mean, because I think Warhol is one of my favorite artists ever because he tapped on that, on popular culture as a means to communicate with his audience, But the thing is, when you get to use an image, and I love that poster store kind of iconography, because you're tired of looking at the same picture of, James Dean and Elvis and Charlie Chaplin and when you look at that, and then all of a sudden you look at it and it's not quite what you think it was. then it forces you to re-examine not only your relationship to that particular image, but also to re-examine your relation to all images of that same kind. It really engage you in some kind of thing. This, I normally show this. These are also pictures from popular culture. Like there are pictures that you've seen. There was this book called The Best of Life that most of you probably have at home. You haven't seen it in years, but there is a collection of all these Pulitzer Prize winning photographs that you've seen a million times, but you still buy the book.
And they're from Life magazine.
From Life magazine, yeah. And then you buy the book. Why? It's the same way you open your family album. You've seen that uncle of yours 1 million times, but you still want to see the picture from time to time to remember what he looks like. I had this book. It was the first book I bought when I came to the U.S. And I lost it. And I took the book to a beach. I never remember why did I take the book. And I lost it. And when I got home, I kept trying to see what was the picture inside my mind. Why did I remember? And I started drawing from memory. For 2 years, I did it as like a hobby, like people do the crossword puzzle. And some of them were very good, And then I had a gallery then, and then like this first, the thing that I really like is the fold. I did this, if you do it over a period of time, every time you remember a little bit, you add something to it. And when I didn't remember, we were talking about Ann Pasternak, the director of the Brooklyn Museum. She used to work with the gallery. So sometimes I call and say, Ann, the kid, when young, at Kennedy's funeral, John is how many buttons on his coat? When the woman at Kent State shootings, is she wearing a scarf? Does she wear a watch? Things like that, because I said that, I just put watches on all your pictures that you have in your minds. She's not wearing a watch. And there were 6 buttons on his coat, maybe 4. But when I was offered to do, some of the pictures are very easy. You just get a bunch of people with 3D glasses, and they look like the picture you've seen before. Another thing, when I was offered a show, and when I did the show, I actually printed the pictures off with a little bit out of focus, to take the hand out of it. And when I printed with the same halftone that I had seen these pictures for the first time, the same language, that I had seen these pictures for the first time in a book. So it's a full circle. But I think the one thing that we should talk about is the picture in your mind. This is what, when you have this match, in a lot of what representation does is matching pictures that are part of your personal repertoire. When I showed them, people didn't care if the images were real or not, because I had met them halfway. They believed the image. You see, I realized a lot of things that I invert a lot of the pictures in my mind. And the pictures look so bad that I never got sued by AP or any of the companies that, the photographers who took the original pictures. But when you look at these pictures, you really think you're looking at news pictures. They just complain about the quality of the printing,
So in a way, you're reaching to our collective memory of these images.
Exactly, and I think I'm trying to see halfway through. Like, we're always making approximations. We don't have a very clear, defined connection with images that we see after. We're always kind of like negotiating that thing. The same way, like in clouds, you see. When you look at a cloud and you see a shape. So I made clouds that look just like some things. But the thing is, like, the clouds, they were made out of cotton. I had to make them upside down. I could, this would be very easy to do today with Photoshop. But the fact that they're made physically adds something to them. Because when you look at this picture, you see a lump of cotton, a cloud, and a guy rowing a kayak. But if you look at the guy, if you think of the guy rowing the kayak, you lose the cloud and the lump of cotton. If you think of cotton, you lose the kayak and the cloud. We have something, a handicap, that allows us to have a lecture at a conference like this. It's called attention. We can only think of one thing at a time, but we can choose what to look at. This is another thing that is very interesting. Not only you have this ambiguity in your mind that deals with approximation, but you can also channel modes of seeing to adapt to what's in front of you. Once I defined the thing that, having a picture in your head, I started like playing with that. And, I'm going to go brush it.
Yeah.
This is like a picture, and this has a lot to do with, believe it or not, has a lot to do with your question.
I hope so.
But
Because I'm paying attention.
But when I made these things out of wire, right? And because when people look at pencil drawings, they always take it for granted. They always judge the quality of a pencil drawing based on how similar it is to what it's trying to represent. But nobody thinks about what a drawing is. If I do this, look. If I do this, I don't even need to do the pencil. What is that? The sun is a ball of fire hanging in the cosmos 8 light minutes from here. I just managed to bring it to this room. Don't tell me this is not magic, because it's not magic today because we have, a PlayStation. But in Paleolithic times, this was really cool. If you did this, you'd be like, David Copperfield. The thing is, I'm always trying to make you think of how cool these things are. When you look at this, you think, oh, it's a pencil drawing. But then there's something called double take. I love this word in English. You look and you look again, First you look and then you see. And then you think, wait a minute, it's not a pencil drawing because these things are small. It's a picture of a sculpture. How big was it? How long did it take to make? Before you know, you're not just looking at something. You're thinking about how you look at things. And this is the most important thing. I think what makes an image art is that it makes you think about yourself. It makes about how you relate, not only to the image, but to other people's impression of the image. I mean, this is what it looked like. This is me and my former self, many, many years ago. But this is, when you get close, you start seeing more and more and more. It's a very simple trick, but, good tricks are very simple. They tend to be very simple. And they're called picture of wire. I started like the same guy in the cave, and then I thought maybe I should try different things. I tried to do landscapes. This is a monkey with a leica. And it's called relaxation. And I tried to do landscapes with wire, but wire is very hard to do. So I started using thread. These things are small. They look like prints. Like etchings. And then when I realized I have to make this thing go. And then, so you have the same way with the cloud. With the cloud that I showed before, you have 2 different readings of the same picture. So you have one reading is topographical, which is just an accumulation of material, and the other reading is a pictorial reading, which is it's a picture of something, But this time is when I started reproducing works by other artists. But I realized that when you look at a picture of a girl running, let me just do this. When you look at a picture of a girl running, and she's, from the picture, she's being sprayed with napalm, right? You just see that girl running naked, in that picture by Nick Ott. You forget that the guy is running backward during a napalm bombing. His camera is hung low. He probably had a Rolleiflex camera. There's so many things that would make that picture look different if it was taken different. The meaning would be different. Pictures are very careful constructed devices. They're complex. They're not simple. And the more complicated, the more layers of meaning you add to the picture, The more you see a picture as a kayak, cloud, and lump of cotton, you can add to it. The more you spend time thinking about what a picture is, and if you add the idea of process into it, when I came to this point, I said, I can do more. I can add art history into it,
So Vik, are you saying in a way that by constructing an image in the way that you do, you're asking the viewer to deconstruct it in order to go back to what
breadcrumbs, yeah.
And that way you ask the viewer to basically reject the reject what you readily accept of the picture to begin with?
Exactly. You know, it's said that every 10 years we turn pages of magazine twice as fast. So it means that we're becoming better and better at absorbing information, but unfortunately we're becoming worse and worse in developing discernment about what an image is, you know. When you create complexity within a picture, you create more and more layers, you know, you force the person into thinking back into the process and start thinking how the picture was made. And then the more you see it, you know, the more that way, when that experience from the painting, that you just cross the material, you see paint and picture, you know. Photography allows you to do a lot more because you can play with scale, you can read material in a picture, so you can play with many, many things, including taste, smell, scale, you know. It's so interesting. But also you can use the picture, and then I only work with artists that I really, really admire. You know, this is a picture that's very complicated. It's from a cliché vert. A cliché vert is, museums don't know what to do with cliché vert because they are photographs in nature, but they're made like an etching. So you actually make, you put soot on a piece of glass, you draw on it, and that becomes a photo negative, and then you print it. Museums, they don't know where to place them because they don't know if they're photographs or prints. And then for that reason, I think they're really good. So there's an enormous amount of cliché vert. I collect them. They're from the late 19th century, you know, and they were reproduced in 1922. And they were wonderful. And most of them from the Barbizon school. And this is from a coho. I did something really cool. You know, there's a story about Picasso that he drew La Californie, the house where he later, you know, made his studio, and he traded the house for that drawing. That is magic, you know. So if you make a drawing and then you trade it for the real thing, it's like you know, Harold and the Purple Crayon, you know. I made a copy from a book, and then I traded for the actual cliché vert. One picture. When my now the guy did a really good job because my picture was worth a lot more than the cliché vert. But for me, I felt so lucky when I did it. You know. The other thing about this that has to do when I made these things, I titled them after the number of yards of thread that I had used, and I could tell by the number of spools that I used. So sometimes I made a picture like this, which is after Gerhard Richter. Gerhard Richter is probably one of the artists that I quoted. You know, Courbet, Richter, because artists are very keen on making commentaries about image making. The thing is, this is just for you to have a glimpse of the complexity of what you're seeing. This is a projection, you know, of a file that was made from a book, that was made from a picture of a sculpture, made from another picture, from another book, from another painting that was made based on the work of Rembrandt. This is, how far does this go? Because Richter sort of quoting Rembrandt in this picture. And when you use an artist that already uses photographic image, it just extends the complexity of it indefinitely. But the funny thing is that I made these pictures, I made some of them like this, like they were 10,000 yards after Gerhard Richter. And then I made some others. They were like I don't know, 45,000 yards after Ruisdael. And the collectors, they didn't care about the picture was better looking or better. They wanted the ones with more thread in it. You know, even though it was a photograph. Go figure, you know.
Vik, when did you first realize that? When did you first become conscious of this, of that power of the photograph?
Well, photographs is the medium that has informed the world around me during most of my lifetime. I must say that, you know, I was born in São Paulo. It was my house was a very poor household. We didn't have books. My father was not the type that saw the news or read newspapers. He won an Encyclopedia Britannica on a pool game. And I remember the day he brought it in on a wheelbarrow, you know. And my grandmother was an amazing woman. She taught me how to read very early, and she read that Encyclopedia Britannica many times. She never had one day of school, but she taught herself how to read, which is pretty crazy too. But I very early on, like Brazil had developed there's something else too, is during the military dictatorship, in Brazil. It's a period of time when you cannot say things just the way you want to say them. You have to resort to metaphors, codes, devices to communicate, especially political ideas, because there was a lot of censorship. So you would have songs, this manifests very much in music. You get songs by Chico Buarque de Holanda or Caetano Veloso. They were love songs. But if you could read through the meaning of the lyrics, they were talking about the government. They're talking about the human condition under military repression. The other thing is, the information that you get, you become very, very cynical about it, become very critical. So photographs, they're very, at least at that time, they were very reliable. They were not something that dealt with opinion. I have to say, at that time, I started developing my consciousness as an intellectual. And it was very, very defining moment in Brazil, because if you could read through those codes, that immediately places you in the place of an intellectual, And then I remember, but most of my colleagues, in school and in life, they were keen of reading politics, the anarchism. They were into like Proudhon, Bakunin, and then and a lot of them were into communism. They were reading Marx. I never subscribed to, packaged ideas. And then I at that time, I discovered Marshall McLuhan. And I realized that politics has more to do with how you see the world, or how you convey an image, a very clear image of the world, than the way you formulate solutions for the world. Because you just formulate solutions based on your own needs most of the time. I think there's something very political about what I do. And even if I'm doing abstract things, because I'm always exercising discernment and clarity in the way you deal with the world outside. If everybody did that, it would foster more empathy. People were interested in how other people see things. They will live other people's lives. They will feel more. And I think I think our education lacks a little bit of that in many senses. And I'm very interested, very invested in education because of that. I'm trying to figure out ways in which you can improve that. Mm-hmm. But photography for me, it was at the moment where information was very, very tricky. And they had magazines in Brazil called Realidade, similar to Life magazine, And I remember going through the text and seeing opinions and going through pictures, and there was a clear break between the captions and the pictures. Pictures were always much real, And until even today, I don't think artists have artists, they have political opinions, but I don't believe artists' political opinions are any better than the policeman or the fireman or the candlestick maker. I think opinions are important, but everybody can have them. But I think what art should do should create an experience where you have to calibrate your relationship to facts around you. For me, it's far more important. And photography, I found it because it was such a reliable medium. It contains so much reality in it. If you start messing with that, it's a great place for you to actually make people reread what's around them.
But in relation to that moment when you're looking at this magazine and comparing the visual to the text-based information, at what point did you own your first camera, for example, and realize your own agency in making the image as opposed to understanding it?
Brassai owned his first camera when he was 40. I wasn't that late. The first camera, I never owned a camera until I was 30. I started making art at 28. I always borrowed cameras. The first large format pictures, I always borrowed a 4x5 camera from the Starn twins. And then it was really cool. Doug and Mike, they always lend me their cameras, and I never really owned a camera. And when I was a kid, there was no photography in my house. So my aunt lived in Miami. She worked for an airline. And then she come every year, take my picture at Christmas time, and then she goes back to Miami. And then next year, I get to see that picture. I tell that to my kids.
Wow.
And then they say, well, why didn't she show you just like this? And I said, those are different times, But I started thinking about photography exactly at the moment. There was one day I made a show of sculptures, and then we sold, half of the show. And because we sold, then the gallery decided that, they're going to keep me as an artist, and they called a photographer to photograph the pieces. I thought there was for me, it started there. There was a guy, I remember his name. His name was Peter Muscato. He came with 2 assistants. They had backdrops. They had lights, big camera. It was like the apotheosis of the artwork, The artwork was in the Oscars, And then, I don't have a picture of that. And then I looked at that and I said, God, this is. And then he made pictures this big of the artwork. And I looked at it, they were perfectly lit. They were sharp. They were right? But they were perfect, but they were wrong. And I started looking at them for a long time. They were wrong. Why they were wrong? And then I bought my first camera. It was a bad camera, the wrong camera. I went to the wrong store, bought the wrong camera, loaded with the wrong film, shot it with the wrong light, and then took it to the wrong place to develop with like a 1-hour photo. And then I looked at the pictures, they were right.
It sounds like he was making your own work in a way.
No. What is about the perfect picture and the right picture, I looked at them for a long time and I realized something. When you make something, right, you first imagine autistic people and children, they have an uncanny capacity of rotating objects in their mind, when they imagine something. As we grow old and we start dealing with language, we lose that capacity. So when you imagine something before you do, you imagine it from a very specific vantage point, right? And then you build that thing. And then when it's built, you look at it, you go around it, and then you look at it. And when you find the exact same vantage point that you had imagined before you make it, you're happy. You went full circle. So whatever you made matches the image that's inside your brain. Peter Muscato didn't know that vantage point. He photographed from a wrong vantage point. In that moment, I became aware of the image in my mind. And after that, it became just a series of you being able to match a mental image to something physical. It's always happening in my work, And I became taking pictures, using photography for that. After that, I didn't care if the pieces were made. I could just throw them away. I had the pictures. But then I started taking pictures of things, making things just to photograph them, which is completely different. The photograph always documents something. I was making something for it to be photographed.
And so in a way, we too came full circle because you showed us the physical understanding of an object by moving back and forth in front of it. It's 1:30. I know some in the audience have to go back to their studios.
No, you cannot go.
I promise we haven't locked the door.
Yeah, the doors are locked. Okay, this is the Sugar Children. I'm going to go quite fast. This is also, there's like political things that you can add to a picture. And I stayed with these kids in St. Kitts for like 2 weeks. And I took pictures of them as people take pictures of kids in vacation. When I came back, the last day that I was there, I had lunch with one of the parents, And the parents were the kids were beautiful. The kids were very tired, very sad people. And I said, how kids like that become grown-ups like that? Because they work 16-hour shifts at the sugarcane plantations. And I realized that the sweetness was taken from them. And so I did these pictures with sugar. And I realized that you add taste to a picture. A photograph can inspire taste. You know, you go to McDonald's, you see that picture of the huge, beautiful hamburger. And I want to eat that. And it comes something very different, you know. And sometimes you're forced to eat that looking at that picture. I've done that. But the idea of inspiring taste is very interesting. You know, I wanted also to do something quite fast, very quickly, that you had to do it like in less than an hour, otherwise it dries. So I started using chocolate. Chocolate is a very complex substance because it's a cultural, as an industrial as it is a cultural invention. So this was very important because I made many, many versions of this. I made people kissing and then people killing each other with chocolate because there's an interference between the material and the meaning of the picture. I'm going to go fast. This was I actually played to food, you know. This took me 2 minutes to make, you know. Time is something very interesting in the work. And this is done with loose pigment, you know, with the use of a dental instrument. It took me 4.5 months to make this. And I had to use a mask and goggles because if I breathe out, this thing becomes a cloud of brown dust. If I breathe in, I die because that's cadmium, you know. But I made 4 months and I had to sell for the same price as I did the one that I did in 5 minutes. So unjust. This is the piece that we started looking. You know, I tried to break the picture into sort of a grammar. So I made the stuff, the medium, which is like powder, pigment, ink. I'm just showing a few examples. There are many, many other series, okay? And then the support, like the paper is something very interesting because the roll, no pun intended, the roll of paper in a digital era is changing so rapidly. Paper used to be something that you used to disseminate information. Now it's for you to actually to document. It's just being reduced to just to document things that happen. So I made these really, really complex collages that they invert. For instance, what is supposed to be the background is on top. It's very hard to explain it, and this is all done by hand. You know, if I laser cut this, it would be just a bag of confetti. But it's quite amazing. I love. Is there a laser pointer here? I think there. Oh no, it's not a laser pointer. I'm just gonna mess up. Oh, I think this. Oh yeah. You see, there's the cutest woman in this picture is right here. Look, she's right there. You know, she has high cheekbones. She's on top of a very good-looking guy. You know she is, you know, when you look at it, you know that she's the good-looking person. In the actual piece, when you come close, she the way I cut it, because it was all cut by hand, she looks just like a jack-o'-lantern. It's so cool how your mind completes, you know, the picture. That's it.
Oh, there she is.
You know, I went from working with materials to working with objects. But it's like I always make these things anamorphically. So I shoot them from an angle, so they don't look like this in reality. But from the camera view, they look just like that. So I did it with, you know, it's called toy soldiers. Toys are funny because toys are a medium in itself. They're something that is between, you know, you play with little toy cars before you can drive, or you play with, you know, toy pens and before you can cook. I made many pieces like this, but then it was just a test before I could do things like this, you know.
Something on a larger scale.
On a larger,
same idea,
yeah,
on a larger
the
scale.
same idea. Well, for 30 years, I've been finding many, many ways of saying the same thing, you know.
Because the toys are also just a miniature version of whatever they
exactly.
managed to
They were
depict.
just a
So
test.
You just
yeah.
went to the full scale.
Yeah, and I got a studio next to the largest junkyard in Rio, you know. And what you're seeing is a picture of the same place. You see, like, it repeats the table in the top. So I had to do it 3 times because I could only do it in one length. And I used it. This is shot from a 60-foot high tower, and it's done on an angle. When people come to my studio, and I say, this is my new work, and then they come and they just see a meaningless heap of garbage, you know. They don't know, oh, God, what am I going to tell this guy? And when they go on the tower, they see, they get very relieved, you know. Narcissus, the Goya, Saturn. I mean, working on a larger scale is very interesting. Like, Smithson is probably one of my favorite artists, but I refused to go see Spiral Jetty because I always wanted to go see the pyramids. And when I went to Egypt, I thought they were too small. And I got so disappointed. So I don't ever want to go see Spiral Jetty because in my head, it's huge.
Actually, you know what you can do? I went to see the Spiral Jetty in 2000, and it was submerged in water. And if you stare at it long enough, you see exactly what you want to see.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going.
But you have to wait until it's submerged in water.
So I liked it so much, I decided to do it in my studio, see? But then it wasn't much fun, so I convinced these mining companies, I needed a place that's very big that I could make drawings on. So I convinced a large mining company in Brazil, one of the biggest in the world. It was at the time, in the early 90s, the Chinese were buying lots of iron from Brazil, so the piles were very low, so you have huge surfaces that I could draw on, and I didn't have to cut a tree. So they were already there. It's just a big canvas for me. And then I made, in the 70s, people did very, abstractions, things that are very spiritual. I didn't want to do that. I wanted just to focus on the work that it takes to make a picture, so I decided to make extremely silly clip art pictures. So like a pair of fuzzy dice that can be seen from airlines. And then you have to shoot it from a helicopter, like that, target, sign here. It really doesn't matter. It's the fact that this has 1 kilometer exactly. So it's a ruler, and they all have to do with somehow the idea of measurement of ergonomics. Hang 10. I'm just gonna go. You see that is the smallest one I made, and that's actually me down there. That's my favorite one. Because they changed the outlets in Brazil. They're not like this anymore, like in America. They're really stupid. So it's my, and that's a really, really big one. And they look, this is another way of making things that are so big that you don't, I made this in New York with Creative Time in 2001. I had a plane, I had a plane draw cartoony clouds. A cloud is something that you expect to see in the sky, but never in the form of a drawing. So the wind just takes it, and it's just all of a sudden you see this cloud just going by, but it's a drawing of a cloud. It's really funny, I'm gonna just jump. This is like, but it's a cloud. I wanted to make a cloud that looks just like a cloud, But the thing is, I received a letter from a woman. That a few days later after I did this, she said that, I want you to invite to come to this. We have two restaurants midtown. They actually belong to our son who just passed away. He was a very, loved person in the baseball community in New York City because he was a Little League coach. He died of cancer. And when we were in the cortege, was going West Side Highway, everybody looked up and they saw a huge baseball glove. Mm. And then I said to her, you know what? I tried to do just a cloud, but the wind did that. And I thought it was even if you try to do a cloud that looks just like a cloud, you can't. There's no way you can do it. People will see what they want to see.
In that movement of scale, because if we compare this kind of work, the earthwork, the cloud, to the photographs that you're taking of the toys, for example, it's the same idea of transformation and the same kind of gray area between the material and the spirituality. But by lifting the scale to such a, by zooming out so much,
sometimes
you're making
material,
us look very
sometimes
small.
scale. Yeah,
you're making the viewer step away from the work by kilometers in a way.
Drawing, when a drawing is so big, you can only imagine it, or you can only see it in a picture too. It's beyond your sensorial apparatus. So it's just you have to, imagine or you have to see it in a picture. The picture is justified by it somehow.
But this is placing the viewer in a much more spiritual position, in a way.
I think so, because it deals with the earth and also it deals with something that is much, much wider, you know. But
And our role in the world. And
but you know what, from a macro scale to this, look, this is the other tool I use. It's called a FIB. It's a focused ion beam. It's a tool that they have at MIT. It took me 13 years to make these pictures because I first tried with Intel, then they dismantled the team that was working on it, and then I got a residency at MIT, and then we managed to do this. What you're seeing is I make these drawings for years. I made drawings using a pre-photographic device called the camera lucida, which is something, the prism that allows you to see, you know, on a sheet of paper what's in front of you, and you just have to trace it. It's a 19th century technology, or late 18th century technology, that you translate into 20th century technology because I actually etch these pictures on single grains of sand, but they're not grains of sand. They're all more like grains of dust. They're so small they would be airborne, you know. If you see there's like things around it, like here and there, because at this scale you cannot clean anything. If that grain of sand was that big, the diameter of a single hair of yours would be like 10 times the size of this room. So this, you see how small it is. It's just a single focused being of ions that actually make the drawing, and we had to design software for it. And then we use an electronic microscope to picture it. But this is the hardest part, because when you change the needles, the points from the ion to the electronic microscope, you have to replace it. So, have you ever tried to find the place where you went to elementary school on Google Earth? You know, and then all of a sudden you hit the mouse and you're in Sweden. It takes sometimes 4 hours to find the drawing again. You know, because it takes a long time, because you have a myriad of little grains of sand, and then all of a sudden you had that. And they're the highest resolution microscopic drawings ever made, because they're like scanned 5,000 times, and they look really three-dimensional. It's about the size of the picture you're seeing there. They're actually pretty cool, because you have this thing between small and large, and between old technology and new technology. I actually made the portrait. You know, when you image it, when you scan it, you end up sometimes erasing the picture because it's so thin, you know. I did a picture of my daughter, Dora, and then I didn't take a picture of it, and I threw the grain of sand in the beach of Ipanema in Rio. So the whole beach is an artwork now.
Oh.
My hope is that when she's 16 and she goes there with her boyfriend, she goes, "Do you really love me? Find me there." It's a father's dream.
That's your father's way of protecting your daughter and keeping her love interest at work for the next millennia.
For sure. That's a very utopic father's dream.
Yes. Well, it's almost 1:45, and I think we have to wrap up here, and maybe on this idea of a beach with your daughter and her boyfriend looking for that piece of sand is a good place to stop. Do we have time for a question? Let's take 2 questions.
And I'd like to ask one.
Oh,
hey,
and the first goes to Wendy.
That's so unfair.
I know it's unfair, but I want to...
She wants to test that the microphone works well.
I want to share a different dimension of Vik. Vik, will you tell us about the project you're about to do with UNICEF?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, we're talking about fostering a more clear relationship to reality through very primitive devices, you know. I really believe that. And then to the point that, you know, that doesn't actually keep me from, you know, pursuing farther goals, you know. I think there's actually a need for action, you know. I know Ai Weiwei was here. He came to my studio. I know him. And we share a lot of things, and also with Olafur. There's I think there's a breed of artists that are living at this point in history. There are going beyond their studios, and they're actually taking advantage of the relationship that they have with their audiences. Based on their work, they're able to engage the audiences in different in looking at a different way to many, many things that are very important right now. For me, I came to this country, I was an illegal alien for 6 years, I came here, I cleaned bathrooms, I worked in gas stations, I have it's not just the curriculum that a lecture presentation can give, but I'm very proud of having done that. And now, the same way as Ai Weiwei, I worked with UNICEF and UNESCO. I'm a Goodwill Ambassador for UNESCO. And we're doing a project called Painting by Numbers. We're used to look at the immigration problem through, just figures. And we forget who these people are. I don't know if you have seen Wasteland, is the film that I made. It was, for me, it was a point in my life that I wanted to know, when you're 21 and you're trying to make art, you're making art because you want to become an artist. By the time you're 40-something, and then 48, 49, you're already an artist. So why you're making art? What is art? That question started plaguing my imagination, and at the same time I was making catalog raisonnés and exhibitions, like retrospective exhibitions. Well, what is it for? In Wasteland, I worked with people who had no contact with art whatsoever, and I realized how the transformative power of art and the influence that a very short stint in a studio working on their own portraits, what made for them, and how important that is, how cool art is, and now it made me even more happy to be an artist working at this time in history. I mean, I reconnected with my culture in Brazil because of the fact that I worked with homeless children in Salvador, and I knew what art did to them. Since that moment, it was in the early 90s, I never stopped working in social projects. I run 2 schools in Brazil, one for children in literacy age, it's called Escola Vidigal. We offer free courses for local children for coding, technology, and basically it's technology and art in design. So and we have partnerships with Columbia University, with MIT, and we have also graduate students that come to teach the teachers how to teach the kids. We are connected with Blue School, with with Ken Robinson, and people who are at the edge of education. And I'm trying to, actually, the goal of making this school for young children is that you don't have to actually make professional courses later to correct the mistakes that they made by not having a real good education. And basically, I'm open this school because I want to know more about education, because it's something that I'm very invested on. And I think we need it. We need to really improve our educational system. So artists don't have to have all the responsibility to be doing these things. Painting by Numbers is a project that we're going to start doing next year. So we're already getting permits and licenses. Is actually to revert the idea that, especially children, we're working with UNICEF, they're just numbers. We know what's happening in this country, we know what's happening everywhere. We're dealing with people with just how many people. One person is very important, because you are important. We should think about this. In Wasteland, nobody knew who the catadores were. They were just marginal people catching garbage on the edge of your vision field. At the end of the film, I think the biggest achievement of the film was the fact that people knew that they were working class. And then after that, they became hired to do all these international events. They can come and take recyclables directly from the World Cup, the Olympics. It changed the whole idea of how they were perceived, And we want to achieve this. So what we want to do is actually go to 3 places with 3 different refugee situations. The first one would be Bangladesh, the other one is Jordan, and the other one is Greece. And to photograph children and make pictures of children with children. So you have like the demographics, the numbers, and then you have one face. And that face is the one that's going to tell the life story of what happened to her. We're going to do this. We have animation shops inside the refugee camps where the children are going to be able to tell their own story. These kids don't have paper. They draw on UNICEF food packages, which is actually, the drawings are amazing. So we're going to actually have, the idea is to create money to build like art shops to be placed in this. They don't have schools, they don't have any education, no art materials, to have places where especially the children can tell their story. So it's coming next year, And I hope this time we win the Oscar. Last time we lost it, but I hope this time we win. Another question.
So one final question, and then we'll...
oh, come on. I'm on a
Wrap up?
roll.
I think we're good, and I think that if anybody wants to come up and talk with
So
you,
we'll be here, and we can continue having more
Yes,
informal
thank
conversation.
you.
Thank you so much.
I like to say one more thing, okay? I want to thank this guy because he's amazing and put up with so much. And I want to thank you all because I never go to these things. It's beautiful outside, and you're here listening to us. I want to thank you, honestly.
Thank you.